welcome, and I'm really glad that you could all make it to this session. Just quickly, I'm not going to be talking for very long at all. Just to say hello, my name's Sam Henson. I'm the Deputy CEO at NGA. We are absolutely delighted to be hosting this webinar, Where to Start with Complex Complaints Involving Safeguarding. And you will all hopefully know that one of NGA's biggest friends and collaborators over many years now has been Brown Jacobson. I'm absolutely delighted that Vicky Wilson and Vicky Hatton are both here to lead us in this session today. So both Vicky and Vicky will say a little bit more about themselves in just a moment. I'm also joined by Martina and Sabrine behind the scenes from NGA. Martina, if you could move me on to the next slide, please. Or Sabrine, even. Thank you. So just from me, just a very quick run through our kind of housekeeping and general welcome. As you can see, the webinar will last no longer than 40 minutes, between half an hour and 40 minutes. We do really try and keep that on time. We really appreciate those of you who are joining us today on the 13th of June, that you may well have other things going on, and this session will stick to time. But yeah, obviously, if you have questions and things that you feel you need to come back to afterwards, if you're a member of NGA and obviously you want to kind of follow those things up, then please do. So this session runs very much in a sort of lecture style, if you like. If you've joined one of our webinars before, you'll be familiar with them. It isn't the most interactive of our events and formats, but what it does do is it seeks to give you a lot of really helpful information and guidance and advice in a fairly short space of time. So we'll run through that pretty quickly. But we do have plenty of other networking opportunities, lots of different events, different things, from our forums to our conferences, where you can come together, speak to each other, speak to us, speak to our colleagues at Brown Jacobson. And probably one of the best places you can do that this term is our conference. And we are absolutely delighted that our conference on the 12th of July is happening very soon. It is a very special event. We probably the biggest event we've ever done, really. We will have two strands, one for multi-academy trust boards, and then one for single schools. So if you want to come to our conference, you're not already signed in, then we have just a few final places remaining. We've had a really big uptake on this event, so I would urge you, if you are wanting to come along on the 12th of July, please do book in as soon as you can to avoid any disappointment. And once you've made your booking, you'll receive an email prompting you to choose your workshops, and we have a brilliant range of workshops at this conference coming up. So please book on, pick your workshops, and come along on the 12th of July. And I think you will enjoy it as much as we will, and you will not only will you be able to speak to us, but be able to speak to our colleagues at Brown Jacobson, who will be there on the day as well. At the end of the webinar, I'll come back in just with a few other NGA points. But just before I hand over to Vicky and Vicky, just to remind you all, you'll all be muted throughout the session. The slides will be sent on afterwards, and the recording will be made available. I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Vicky and Vicky. Thank you so much for joining us, Vicky and Vicky.
Thank you, Sam, and hello, everyone. I am Vicky Hatton. I'm a senior associate specialising in education law at Brown Jacobson. I also come with about 13 years of governance experience. I've been a trustee and member of an academy trust. I've been a governor of Maintain School, chair of governors of a Maintain Special School, and I now sit as a governor at a university and as a trustee of a diocesan umbrella trust company as well. So lots to cover today, so I'll pass over to Vicky for a brief introduction and we'll get going.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Vicky Wilson, also a senior associate at Brown Jacobson with a particular specialism in safeguarding. I do lots of pastoral work in terms of special educational needs and safeguarding in particular. So hopefully today's session will be tailored around the complex complaints that schools are dealing with in terms of that particular arena. If we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So we will focus very much on how to handle complex parental complaints involving safeguarding today. We've got until about 10 past, 1:15, so we'll cover as much ground as we possibly can in that time. We'll start with an overview of the role of governors and trustees in that complaints process. We'll then lead on to the crossover between the complaints process and the use of safeguarding information. We will look particularly at how to gather information, how to assess the situation, how to maintain open communication with parents and anybody else involved, and how to document all of the actions that you are taking during that process. We hope that you will then have the skills and confidence to deal with a lot of these issues that arise within your trusts and schools thereafter. So over to Vicky for complaints in context.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So to set a bit of context, we're going to start with a look at what the data tells us about the impact of parent complaints. The outcome of the NEHT survey, which was shared with the TES earlier this year, were mirrored by our own school leaders survey. That school leaders survey was carried out over 3 weeks in March, and about 200 leaders completed the survey. Next slide, please. So what did the results of our survey tell us? Well, firstly, there's clear evidence that the number of complaints from parents to schools and academy trusts just continues to rise. Just under half of respondents strongly agree that parents were now quicker to escalate complaints to the formal stage of the process. And as you can see, a further 21% of respondents somewhat agreed with that statement. Next slide, please. Secondly, there's no doubt that managing complaints from parents and carers is having a direct negative impact on school staff. Quite an astonishing 90% of our respondents reported a detrimental impact on staff well-being, and about 48% reported a negative impact on staff retention. About 19% of our respondents reported that it was having an impact on the recruitment or retention of governors. Next slide, please. Finally, what we can be absolutely clear on is that managing complaints has become a more substantial part of the day job, both for school leaders and also for you as governors too. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's have a little deeper dive into the role of governors and trustees in the complaints process. In our experience, complaints management within academy trusts and within schools is very often reactive or simply about going through the motions of the complaints process. This ends up leaving schools feeling like they're flotsam on the tide of complaints, feeling out of control. And as a result of that, what can often result in is a overly defensive approach, an us versus them kind of view. Where I think trustees and governors can really add value is in taking and encouraging school leaders to take a genuinely strategic approach to complaints management. So ensuring that the trust or the school has an effective legally compliant complaints policy is part of that process, but it really isn't the only element, and we shouldn't just stop there. So we would really encourage you as governors and trustees to consider things like how your trust or school values shine through in the way your school or trust manages complaints. So consider, for example, a recent trust or recent school complaint that you've been involved in, or you know your school has been involved in. What values did the school or trust demonstrate in dealing with that complaint? Was there a culture of open conversation, of mutual respect? Was communication open and solution focused? What do you as a board know about complaints within your school or trust? So go and gather some information on concerns and complaints, perhaps over the last year or 3 years or 5 years, including at what stage the complaint was resolved at and what the subject matter of that complaint was. Are there any common themes? If you're a trustee in a MAT, do some of your schools have substantially more complaints than others? If so, reflect on what the reasons for that could be. The other key point is to get feedback and listen. So reflect as governors and trustees on your school or trust's current practices for obtaining feedback from parents. Is this a genuine opportunity for reflection and school improvement, or is it just a tick box exercise? Are negative comments just dismissed as, one or just a small number of disgruntled parents? Are there any recurring themes that you can see, perhaps over the last year, 3 years, 5 years? What could be done to address these? Again, reflecting on a strategic approach to complaints management. How well are the staff within your organisation trained in complaints management? Being an effective communicator will come naturally to some, but not others. And some staff perhaps might be unaware of the unintentional or unconscious behaviours or language or body language and the unintended consequences then that may have on the recipient. So what strategies do you have as a school or trust to ensure staff have the skills they need to communicate effectively? Are you training them in how to have those difficult conversations, how to undertake conflict management? What about training for you? What about training for governors and trustees and your governance professional too? As we're going to come on to in the next slide, trustees and governors can be drawn into an operational role in managing complaints. If governors are going to get things right for you when they sit on complaints committees, then they need to clearly know what is expected of them. And the governance professional that you have also will have a really key role in the complaints management process. What training, what support does the trust or school have in place to make sure that the right process is always followed? And finally, when we're thinking about strategy, what systems does your trust or school have in place to ensure complaints are managed effectively? Do your school leaders, do your governors, does your governance professional have access to templates to ensure you're covering all the points you need to, that you're compliant with the law and regulations, and crucially, your own complaints policy too? Do they have ready access to professional support for complaints involving very complex matters like safeguarding, as we'll come on to? Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, complaints is an area where governors and trustees can and are increasingly called upon to take on a hands-on operational role. And having done this myself, even with all the skills that I have developed in my professional role, it's a really intimidating process and can absolutely and will be hugely time consuming too. As we'll come on to, in complex complaints, especially those involving safeguarding, they can be incredibly demanding and difficult to manage. Whilst the de-escalation of complaints and maintaining that all-important relationship between home and school is important, only in exceptionally rare circumstances would it be appropriate for governors to deal with concerns at the informal stage, often known as stage 1. The intervention of governors in matters of a school or trust operation is a serious step. and as a result, really should only be taken where the trust or the school has failed to resolve the matter at the informal stage, or the issue is about the head teacher or CEO, and there's just no other senior executive leader who is able to undertake that effective investigation process. So if a parent approaches you as a governor with a concern, this, in virtually all cases, should simply be directed to a member of staff. Governors should not be looking to intervene at that informal stage of the process. It's a matter for the school or the trust. However, as I mentioned, there are occasions when governors and trustees are asked to undertake a formal investigation into a complaint, and we generally refer to these as stage 2 investigations. We are going to look at where governors may become involved in formal complaints of a safeguarding nature later in the session with Vicky. Governors and trustees are probably more likely than getting involved in the investigation stage, are probably more likely to have experience of sitting on those complaints committees or those governor complaint review panels, and we generally refer to those as stage 3 panels. This is where the parent remains dissatisfied with the outcome of a stage 2 formal complaint investigation and wants the matter to be considered by a panel of governors. This is generally, although you need to check your own complaints process, but this generally is the final stage of the complaints process. And if the parent then remains dissatisfied about that stage of the process, the stage 3 outcome, then they have the right to escalate their complaint to the Department for Education. And the Department for Education has a very limited role in considering school complaints, generally about whether or not the process was followed appropriately. Okay, I'm going to hand on to Vicky now.
Thank you for that really helpful scene setting, I suppose, Vicky. It's really helpful to explain exactly how governors can approach these sorts of issues. Schools indeed have contact with children and their families every day. And so it's incredibly easy for schools to be the very first port of call, first point of contact when something's not going particularly well. So complaints involving children's social care and the police can take numerous forms. I mean, safeguarding it comes in various shapes and sizes, and so we need to explore every single case on a case-by-case basis. It needs a tailored approach. In this part of the session, we'll look at what clearly falls outside the scope of the school's complaints policy and how you might deal with matters when concerns do fall within the school remit to be investigated, responded to, and hopefully resolved. Next slide, please. So here is an example of the kind of scenario which you might face as a governor involving a complex safeguarding complaint. It's not based on a particular real life case study, but it's inspired by the kinds of things that we routinely advise on. So just taking us through the case example of Annie. Annie is a pupil at the school where you're a governor. Annie displays challenging behaviour and is currently undergoing an assessment for autism. Annie's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, went through an acrimonious divorce, and Annie now spends every other weekend with her father, his new wife, and stepson. On Monday, Annie was involved in a fight with another pupil, Billy. The fight was broken up by the Senko and the head teacher, who both happened to be present on the scene, and Annie was physically restrained. She was taken to the school's first aid room, and during the school nurse's examination, it was revealed that Annie had a number of bruises on her torso. She disclosed that these were made by her stepbrother, and the school has made a social services referral. Annie's mother, Mrs. Smith, has emailed the school to complain. She says that she has previously reported the bullying that Annie has suffered from Billy, and the school has done nothing about it. She says that the Senko and the head teacher have used excessive force on Annie and caused bruises. She's reported the members of staff to the police for assault. Mr. Smith has then also been in contact. He is furious about the referral of his stepson to social services. So it would be entirely understandable for the governor dealing with this case to feel completely overwhelmed in the first instance. As I've said, complaints involving safeguarding need a tailored approach, and we don't really have enough time to go through the intricate details of every single scenario in this case study today, but we will take it through the rest of the session in order to be able to use it as a meaningful case study. We're going to look at the types of things that a governor, like the one in this example, might generally need to consider. So we'll look at how to gather information, how to assess the situation, and next steps essentially in dealing with the process, how to maintain open communication, and how to document all the actions that you're taking. Thank you. Next slide, please. So, on receipt of a formal written complaint from Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the governor will need to read the letter of complaint thoroughly and refer to the school or the trust's complaints policy. Then you'll need to consider the questions on this slide. So, what is being complained about? Some complaints will be straightforward in the sense that it's clear exactly what's being complained about. In other complaints, you might have sweeping statements or comments just generally about the provision of safeguarding or the fact that children at school aren't safe, for example, and you'll need to look at those in a little bit more detail. Ask for some clarification of the issues if it's not clear from the correspondence exactly what the issue is. Secondly, what's the desired outcome? So often it's not clear what the complainant is seeking. It's a good opportunity at the outset of your complaints procedure to investigate and essentially ask the question, ask exactly what is being sought and how things might need to be resolved. And lastly, what's the purpose of your investigation? Well, it's helpful to be clear at the outset exactly what is within the scope of your investigation and what is not within the scope of your investigation. And then work out how you're going to get from A to B with essentially a decision and an outcome that can then be communicated to parents. You need to be quite clear what you are doing with anything that falls outside the scope of your investigation. So it may well be that you refer to another policy or procedure that parents can pursue if they wish. Thank you. Next slide, please. So matters likely to require a child protection investigation, those are very much out of scope in terms of your complaints policy and should be passed immediately to your designated safeguarding lead, your DSL at school, so that your child protection and safeguarding policies can be followed. Referrals may well need to be made to the local authority, the LADO or the MASH team, and or the police, depending on the issues that you're dealing with. Concerns from other parents or third parties about a child's situation, again, should be handled as a safeguarding concern, and a response can be sent to that particular individual to thank them for raising the concern and to confirm that the matter will be dealt with in line with the school's safeguarding policies and procedures. So essentially, if it's a live safeguarding matter, it's not complaints policy territory. Anything that falls then within the scope of the complaints policy may well be, as I said before, sweeping statements around safeguarding practices generally that need to be understood and further explored. Complaints about the school's handling of a previous safeguarding matter, again, that may well fall within the scope of a complaints investigation, absolutely, and may also warrant further investigation. You may want to be quite clear at the outset if there's any limitations to what you're doing. Managing expectations around parents is key, really, to whether or not things can be successfully resolved. You might want to consider whether there's also exceptional circumstances which warrant consideration of a complaint where you might not otherwise deal with it. So, any exceptions to your usual approach should be documented in the correspondence that you're having with the parent. Safeguarding is one of the exceptions that usually means that a complaint or concern is considered in order for the school to investigate and document its response. That they are usually quite serious in terms of anything that's going to be escalated, and so it's important that the school investigates thoroughly, documents that process, and then quite clearly communicates the outcome to the parents so that the school's position is put on the record. Thank you. Next slide, please. Now, schools can only deal with complaints about matters that are within the school's power and control. So, if you've got children's social care involved in a particular matter and the complaint relates to something that children's social care have or have not done, then that is outside again the scope of the school's investigation. Quite clearly, you'll be looking at the school's side of things and confirming whether the school has actually fulfilled any of its statutory duties. But anything in terms of what social care should or shouldn't or haven't done is really a matter for that local authority to be dealing with, and parents should be directed to them to pursue any complaint separately. We quite regularly refer to keeping children safe in education, and also it's important to remember that working together to safeguard children, the statutory guidance about multi-agency working is crucial when you're dealing with any of these complaints that involve external third parties and safeguarding. Information sharing is key. Again, understand the duties and responsibilities of the school in terms of whether and when it should be sharing information, with whom, and to what extent. Thank you. Next slide, please. With safeguarding matters, you may also have the involvement of the police. Police are one of the 3 statutory safeguarding partners, and most schools and trusts have a good sort of contact, at least with the police liaison officer or somebody else within the force. It's important not to do anything in terms of your complaints policy or procedure that would prejudice any ongoing police investigation. So there may well need to be some communication with the police in terms of the ongoing criminal matter, for example, whether there are any charges being brought, etc., whether you are able to get on with your internal investigation whilst the police conduct whatever they're doing externally. So do just check if there is any concern around what's going on with a criminal case, then do liaise with the external partners accordingly. Use of or reference to police reports, again, that is something that very much comes on a case-by-case basis. It may well be that the police can provide you with an extract of information or a statement or something that gives you the evidence that you need to pursue the internal process that you're conducting. So again, just look at that information sharing duties and responsibilities from all angles when you're dealing with these matters. Thank you. Next slide, please. I thought I'd touch just briefly on investigation strategy. It's not something that governors are frequently involved with. And so when you are asked to investigate a parental complaint, particularly one of a serious nature involving safeguarding, I thought it might be helpful to set out essentially the key steps in the process. So initially, you would want to scope the complaint, as we have already touched upon. So decide what it is that you will be dealing with, decide what it is that falls outside the scope of the complaint, and communicate that clearly with the parents. The rest of the next of the steps, you'll very much have to have a cup of tea, take a step back, and actually just decide which order you're going to do things in, depending on what's involved, who you need to speak to, and so on. But you will need to essentially gather and review documents and policies, both internally from the school, and you may also want to ask parents to provide any information that they have that may be relevant. You'll also want to meet with the complainant and confirm the scope of the complaint. Consider any relevant evidence, again, from the complainant. It's important really to give them an opportunity to respond. So in terms of timescales and things, allow enough time for parents to gather information, send it across to you before you commence your complaint investigation. Decide who will need to be interviewed. Now, you'll probably start with a list of 3 or 4 people that you'd like to speak to within school in relation to a complaint. That list may well grow, and that is fine as and when you go through those interviews with the interviewees. So, if you end up speaking to 6 or 7 people, that is absolutely fine. Just make sure that you do speak to everybody that you need to in order to come to a conclusion. In terms of interviewing witnesses and keeping notes, it's really important to document all of the conversations that you have around a complaint, even if it's just sort of after the end of a governor's meeting or before this, that, and the other. Do just make sure you're keeping a record of any relevant conversations in respect of your investigation. Input from external third parties. Now, we would advise you to consider getting input from the local authority or the police, etc., if it's necessary. Um, Quite clearly, there's an element of risk and information sharing associated with involving any external third parties. So it should really be considered on a case by case basis. But there may be instances where you do require information that the school simply doesn't hold and would need to get hold of in order to come to a conclusion. Again, coming back to proportionality, I suppose, some of these complaints will be incredibly complex, and we're just seeing such an increase in the complexity and length and depth of complaints. So you'll need to tailor your approach depending on what you're dealing with, but make sure that you allow time to give it proper consideration. And if you do need input from external third parties, that is likely to impact upon your timescales. Thank you. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of sources of evidence, your bundle of evidence in support of your complaint investigation also might grow into the tens, if not hundreds, of pages in some instances. Um, Here I have just simply set out some of the things that you'll need to consider um, as part of your investigation process. So, key correspondence that will be between the school and the parents, clearly, and may well be between the school and the local authority and any external agencies as appropriate. You also might need to look at any internal communications between staff at the school. In terms of school documentation, you might also have a subject access request response. We see quite frequently that complex complaints go hand in hand with subject access requests from parents. And so, if there has been a recent SAR, then make sure you're aware of that and the information that has been provided in response to the parents. If you have quite a clear scope at the outset, you should be able to narrow down the rest of the information that you require from data held on information management systems, such as CPONs in relation to safeguarding. Lots of schools use the Child Protection Online Management System to store safeguarding information, and it's important that you as governors are aware of how those systems work and how you can use them to essentially collate the information that you will need to review, understand what reports can be produced, and where information is stored. School policy documents, well, clearly you'll need the complaints policy, and commonly you will also need the behaviour policy, send policy, safeguarding policy, etc. The list goes on depending on what you're dealing with. But those are the policies that we would ordinarily expect schools to be looking at when dealing with a complex complaint involving safeguarding. With complaints, you'll also need to look at the school's duties and whether the duties outlined in those school policy documents have been met. As part of the process, you may well need to go back and look at some of your policies and see whether or not they need some addition, revision, or whatever else might be required. And then the second line there, we've got documents from the complainant. Sometimes they can be vast, sometimes nothing at all, and that's fine either way. Just make sure that it's included and considered. Key law and statutory guidance. Again, we've touched on the statutory guidance that applies in complex safeguarding complaints. There may well be some other statutory references that you want to draw upon. Interviews with witnesses, again, you'll have your neat records of any interviews that you hold, and then anything else that's relevant. So we come across all sorts: CCTV, WhatsApp messages, social media posts, you name it, we've seen it, and it all goes into your bundle of supporting documentation when you're looking at your investigation. Thank you. Next slide, please. Interviewing techniques. Well, interviewing is quite a skill. You, as educationalists and governors in the sector, are usually incredibly good at communicating and interviewing. So, we wanted to focus really on the skills that we can add as legal professionals to that process. You'll very much want to be prepared going into any interview with a witness and have a list of key questions ready for them. Now, you also need to be prepared to deviate from that list of questions as the conversation develops. And open ended or open questions tend to be a good place to start in terms of putting a question to an individual and allowing them to talk to you. Closed questions can also be useful. So, did you witness an incident on 10th of December, for example? Yes or no? But we tend to suggest that leading questions are not suitable for this sort of exercise. So you could potentially say, is it true that you saw pupil X push pupil Y, for example? But do be careful in terms of how you're using leading questions, and it's much better to allow the witness to actually speak to you rather than putting words into their mouth. You'll also want to avoid asking multiple questions. So again, just ask one question at a time so that it's clear on the question that's being put to the individual so that they can respond to that question. And in using multiple choice questions, I mean, again, that might be relevant in terms of was it this date, or this date? But in terms of people or individuals, again, it's much better to allow people to just tell you the story in their own words. Moving on, please, next slide. So once you've done all of your investigating and you've spoken to the people that you need to, and you've got your supporting bundle of documents, we advise clients to produce an investigation report, usually at stage 2 of the complaints process. This should very much read as a standalone document with reference to your supporting documents that you have collated. That's just an incredibly helpful way of dealing with things at stage 2, particularly if things are then escalated to stage 3. Everything is neatly packaged together and can simply be handed to a stage 3 panel to review. It's always helpful to set out the background, number one, there, and tell the story to date in the introductory section. Include details of the complaints and the timeline to date. Some things go off on a tangent or deviate from policy for whatever reason. So, to have that explanation at the beginning of a report is incredibly useful. Set out the details of the investigation, so the meetings that you held, the correspondence that you've included, the people that you've interviewed, and the documents that you've considered. Then it's always helpful to include a summary of the complaint, just so that it's clear what fell within the scope of the investigation. Then you can detail the findings, the conclusions, and the recommendations in relation to each of those points raised. You can also make it clear what the next steps will be in line with the complaints policy. So either a letter, a decision letter out to the complainants, or for it to be handed to somebody else to respond on behalf of the school or on behalf of the trust. We suggest that the report is labelled confidential, keeping in mind that quite clearly if a subject access request is made by the parent after the report is made, it may well fall within the scope of the documents that may well be disclosed as part of that process. So do keep that in mind, that the report may well need to be disclosed to a parent either in full or in part with relevant redactions in due course, and include an appendices or refer to the documents in support of your investigation report. So you've essentially got your investigation report, appendices, and then the supporting documents in a nice neat package ready to hand to stage 3 if necessary. Thank you. New slide, please. Talking briefly about the decision letter that goes out to parents. This should state that the letter contains the decision in relation to their formal complaint, usually again at stage 2. It should confirm whether the timescales within the complaints policy have been complied with or deviated from for whatever reason, and also confirm which evidence has been considered and the investigation process that's been undertaken. So all of that clearly communicated to parents by you if you have been investigating on behalf of the school or the trust. You should also list the documents that were reviewed as part of the investigation. Again, that can lead to further subject access requests down the line, but actually, if it's escalated to stage 3, the documents will be provided to the parent either in full or in part in due course anyway. And then also include a summary of the complaint and your decision in relation to each of those elements. Thank you. Next slide, please. So in terms of breaking the complaint down, you should be confirming in your decision letter whether the complaint is upheld, whether it's upheld in part, or whether it's not upheld at all, with sufficient information and explanation as to why that decision was reached. So you should have your summary of each element of the complaint, your findings, that's your factual findings, your conclusion, and then any recommendations that are made to the school and can be shared with the parent. We've been asked to consider who should have a copy of the decision letter. So a copy ordinarily goes to the parents, also a copy to the head and or the chair of governors, and any others as appropriate, really. That's a case by case decision. Beyond that, we would suggest. If you're straying into employment or HR territory with any of the decisions that have been made, then do bear in mind if there's an ongoing disciplinary process or proceedings in relation to the subject of the complaint, for example, if you've got a teacher involved, then do just be mindful of how those two processes are running concurrently and the timings in relation to release of any information. We've also been asked to consider if a complaint is upheld in full. So if actually, yes, there is merit to every aspect of a parental complaint, can it or should it be escalated to stage 3? And our advice in relation to that is yes. I mean, it could still and should still be referred to stage 3. It could be a review of the process that you are undertaking, or a review of who is involved, or indeed a review of the outcomes. So do just keep in mind that things can still be escalated and should be escalated all the way through your complaints policy if requested by the parent. Thank you. Next slide, please. Just a word here on conclusions, and I'm very conscious of time, but you will have these slides afterwards. So have a think about whether there's opportunities for school improvement, whether things could have been handled differently, and again, if it's possible to make a concession in order to resolve the matter, whether that is favourable in a particular instance, and whether that might avoid any further escalation. Thank you. Next slide, please. Just a word on recommendations. This mainly stems from the investigation report. So if you've got a really lengthy investigation report, it's quite helpful to have a summary of your recommendations, either at the end or as a separate document that can be shared with the head or the chair and the rest of the board as appropriate, so that those recommendations can be actioned. It's also important and helpful to consider the timing of any recommendations. So if you have a policy review, for example, the policy may be reviewed over the summer, ready for the start of a new term. Keep a paper trail of exactly what's been done, when and by whom, and then do monitor and review any changes that you've made and their effectiveness. It's really important that if changes have been made and have been successful, that you're recording how that's taken place and what has been effective, so that there can be either school-wide or trust-wide learning from a particular complaint. Thank you very much indeed. I'll pass back to Vicky very quickly in terms of some useful links that will be on the next slide.
Thank you, Vicky. Yeah, we've just put together some useful links for you on the topic of complaints. On there is the recent webinar that Vicky and I did about problem parent behaviour, and the last link on that slide will take you to our resources, so our complaints management support pack, our parent behaviour support pack, and also give you details about our CPD complaints management course that Vicky and I run, all about complaints. It's about 20 hours worth of complaints material if today has not been enough for you. Next slide, please. And finally, just a plug, particularly for my attendance at the NGA conference, I will be doing the session on handling complaints. My colleague Di Durbridge will be covering off around the safeguarding. So he'll be doing the single school audience and the match audience workshop on safeguarding, and I'll be covering off handling complaints. What I would say on that is, at the moment, I've got a blank sheet of paper with nothing written on it, with a very broad title called Handling Complaints. So I'm going to throw it out to you. If there is any questions, any case studies, any issues or themes that you would like to see covered during that session around complaints, drop me an email, which is on the next slide, and I will very happily build a whole session around it just for you. Thank you, Sam.
Can you hear me now? Sorry, I was muted. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Vicky and Vicky. That was absolutely fantastic, and we are absolutely delighted, Vicky, that you will be joining us on the 12th of July. Really looking forward to seeing you there, and I really hope that you all benefited from that as much as I did, and I think you know, having that as a resource that you can return to, like I said, the recording will be put on our website, so an awful lot in there that is so important for us to know and be aware of, and to talk about. So I'm sure you will want to go back to the recording once it's there, and if you know of anyone who's missed it, please do share it as well. Just to really back up Vicky's point at the end, I think that's a brilliant opportunity to really come loaded with some questions. So do get in touch, and if you want to email Vicky directly, or if you need to email us and we can pass it on to Vicky, I'm sure that's absolutely fine. Yeah, thank you both so much. That was absolutely fantastic. Real pleasure to have you both here talking to us.
Our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Martina, Sabrina, if you can move me on. Sorry. Just a final word from me. Just a couple of things. There was a couple of comments around resources. NGA's guidance on our Knowledge Centre has lots and lots of resources, lots of different things in relation to exactly this topic. Like I said in the chat, I think even from this session, it's given us some ideas of things that we could develop that we don't yet have. So any thoughts around those sorts of practical tools that you think this session or anything else has raised that would be beneficial, we are always open to suggestions. We have a fantastic team at NGA who can jump onto that. So please do let us know if there's anything missing in the Knowledge Centre that you think we need to be looking at, and we certainly will give that a lot of thought. Next slide, please. That's just another slide, just listing our various resources. I did mention Learning Link as well. So we don't just have guidance, we have our learning module, e-learning modules, and as well, you can always contact our training consultancy team to arrange bespoke training sessions as and when you need them. Next slide, please. So we've already talked about the conference, but I'm just going to do one final plug. Please book in before all the places have gone. Really exciting event for us. And for those of you who know NGA well, you will know Emma Knights, who's been the CEO at NGA for 14 years. This will be her last event for NGA before she finishes. And so really is a really exciting opportunity to come and hear from Emma on her reflections from the last 14 years, the various things that she's come across and been and done and said, and the key learnings from that period of time. So it is really a brilliant opportunity to come and hear from that. We have a host of exciting events in the new academic year that we're already starting to promote. As you can see, do start to book on these as and when you can. We'll be announcing more in the coming weeks and months for the new academic year ahead. And then next slide, please. All that's left for me to say is to basically say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you once again to Vicky and Vicky for just being brilliant at delivering that session and giving us so much to think about. And I know if you could unmute yourselves, you would join me in thanking them both. But Vicky and Vicky, you'll just have to you just have to take my word for it for now, if that's okay. But yeah, thank you both so much again. And yeah, we'll leave you all to go back to the rest of your day and hope to see you very soon. Thank you.